The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
No one in the enclosed room at Windsor dared to speak. Before Prince William lay a sealed decree bearing the personal seal of the late Queen Elizabeth II. King Charles III sat opposite, almost motionless in silence. Princess Anne stood beside the custodian of the secret files, while two constitutional advisors awaited a decision that could permanently alter the boundaries of the British monarchy. William read the first line slowly. Then he looked up and said without hesitation, "Meghan's public use of the title Duchess of Sussex will be restricted, and this order will take effect before midnight on the palace clock." This was not merely a change in address. The decision could affect official correspondence, ceremonial activities, commercial projects, how outside organizations present Meghan, and any instance that might lead the public to believe she was still acting with the backing of the monarchy. Charles did not object, but he disagreed. The king's silence made the atmosphere in the room even heavier. Anne turned to the last page of the decree. Next to Elizabeth's signature was a handwritten line that no one in the room could ignore. William, not Charles, is authorized to activate the clause if the future stability of the monarchy is threatened. In that moment, William understood that his grandmother had placed this burden on him years ago. Before the story continues, where are you following this story from? Leave your city or country in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next developments of the British royal family. Just then, the door to the meeting room suddenly burst open. A private secretary entered, her face pale. Meghan knew about the decree. Harry was constantly on the phone, and he demanded to see William before midnight. But to understand why Elizabeth granted this power to William, the story must go back to a secret meeting that took place in the final years of her reign. That decision was no accident. Queen Elizabeth II accurately predicted that one day King Charles III would have to choose between his royal responsibilities and his affection for his youngest son. And she understood that when that moment arrived, Charles might not be decisive enough to act. It all began after Prince Harry and Meghan withdrew from official royal duties. Despite the growing distance between them and the palace, Elizabeth allowed them to retain their titles of Duke and Duchess of Sussex. For her, it wasn't just a concession, it was a way to preserve a fragile family bond. Elizabeth believed that leaving duty didn't necessarily mean leaving family. She hoped Harry could still build his own life without completely severing ties with those he once called home. But over time, palace officials began to notice an increasingly uncontrollable problem. The line between personal activities and royal roles has become blurred. A project involving Harry and Meghan might be private, but when that project uses words like Sussex Royal or Heritage, the public and outside partners can easily assume it still has the backing of the British royal family. This is particularly dangerous for an institution that relies on the clarity of power and accountability. The real turning point came during a private video conference concerning a lifestyle project bearing the Balmoral Heritage imprint. During that exchange, a name was proposed to outside business partners: Sussex Royal Heritage Collection. There was no official document from the palace authorizing the use of that name. There was no direct approval from the Queen, but the mere combination of the three words Sussex Royal and Heritage created the impression that the project had an official connection to the monarchy. When the meeting transcript was handed to Elizabeth, she didn't get angry. She took off her glasses, placed the file on the table, and underlined the phrase Royal Heritage with a pen. The room fell silent. Her constitutional secretary expected a harsh reaction, but Elizabeth only asked a very short question. Why should kindness to the family be interpreted as an unlimited public license? No one answered. Elizabeth looked back at the words on the paper and said that heritage is not an asset to be exploited. Heritage only has value when it is received with responsibility. For her, the issue wasn't whether Harry and Meghan wanted to build their own careers. The problem was that the symbolic power of the royal family could be transferred to a commercial operation without accompanying obligations, oversight, or accountability. Soon after, Prince William was summoned. William initially suggested restraint. He warned that any drastic measures could make Harry feel betrayed, push Meghan into confrontation, and turn a matter of governance into a family crisis. Elizabeth listened for a long time. Then she asked William, "Will every future monarch have to renegotiate the same boundaries whenever family sentiment clashes with royal power?" That question silenced William. For the first time, he understood that this was no longer just a matter between Harry and Meghan. Without a clear mechanism, the same crisis could recur across multiple reigns. Elizabeth closed the file and ordered the preparation of an unpublished clause. But when it came to the part about granting the power of activation, she didn't write Charles's name. She wrote William's name. And that was the first sign that Elizabeth had foreseen her eldest son's hesitation when the throne and fatherhood were forced to stand on opposite sides. In the weeks that followed, she asked her constitutional advisors to prepare a provision that had never been publicly released. Its content was clear. If a royal title was used in a way that led the public to believe that a commercial project was receiving the monarch's approval, or if the royal identity was transformed into a source of personal power outside the palace's oversight, the public use of that title could be restricted. Elizabeth did not call this a punishment. She called it a final limit, a mechanism to be used only when all previous restraints had failed. She also understood that such a provision could not be in the hands of a single person. Therefore, Elizabeth divided responsibilities very carefully. Princess Anne was given the original directive. The reigning monarch had to be informed before any action was taken. Prince William was responsible for assessing whether the triggering conditions had actually been met. Constitutional advisors would confirm that every step had been taken according to procedure. Elizabeth also signed another document revoking previously made informal concessions regarding the use of the Sussex title in private affairs. By this document, she wanted to eliminate any gray areas. Oral agreements, family flexibility, and past informal permissions would no longer be sufficient to prevent the clause if royal boundaries continued to be blurred. After Elizabeth's death, the sealed briefcase was given to Anne. Charles knew the clause existed. He also knew he would one day have to face it. But for months, he did not make a final decision. Charles was not just the king. He was also Harry's father. He worried that a decisive action might sever the fragile thread of communication remaining between them. He feared Meghan would see the decision as a deliberate attack. He feared the family conflict would instantly escalate into a global media crisis. And most of all, Charles feared that if the order were triggered, William and Harry would never find their way back together. William, however, saw things differently. With each passing month without a decision, he became increasingly convinced that the delay was undermining what Elizabeth was trying to protect. According to William, if the palace continued to allow a royal title to appear in projects that were not yet approved, the public would find it increasingly difficult to distinguish between personal activities and the voice of the monarchy. The disagreement between Charles and William didn't erupt into a major argument. It manifested itself in brief meetings, unanswered letters, and longer than usual silences. Finally, Anne was forced to speak frankly. She reminded Charles that Elizabeth had accurately predicted this hesitation. That was why she hadn't given him full power. Charles looked at Anne for a long time before confessing that he didn't know whether preventing William would save the family or simply cost the monarchy its power for a father's fear. While he was still undecided, a new document arrived at William's desk. A Sussex-branded project was being prepared for publication the following morning. The language in the document continued to suggest that the Sussex identity carried a form of inherited royal power, even without any current royal approval. William read the entire draft twice. For him, this was no longer a misunderstanding. This was the final proof that Elizabeth's condition had been met. That evening, Anne entered the private meeting room at Windsor. She placed the sealed briefcase on the table, turned the lock, and opened the lid. Inside was the original directive still bearing Elizabeth's signature. Only a few hours remained before midnight, and William had to do what Charles had been putting off for months. He pulled the decree closer, reread the final confirmation, and placed his pen down beside his signature. No one in the room moved. The two constitutional advisors examined each clause, each seal, and each appendix page in turn. Princess Anne stood beside the still open briefcase, her eyes fixed on the document. King Charles III sat opposite William, his hands clasped tightly, as if he were trying to hold back something that was beginning to slip out of control. After a few seconds of silence, William spoke. The clause was activated. His voice was calm but not cold. He wasn't speaking like an older brother resolving a conflict with his younger sibling. He was speaking like an heir fulfilling a predetermined responsibility. The scope of the decision was immediately clear. Meghan remains Harry's wife. Their marriage is not invalidated. Her personal achievements, charitable work, and role as a mother were not erased. But from midnight onwards, the title Duchess of Sussex would no longer be used as a publicly recognized identity with positive royal approval in commercial projects, ceremonial activities, or any form of official representation. Outside organizations would not be allowed to present Meghan in a way that would lead the public to believe she was still acting with the monarch's approval. All correspondence, ceremonial lists, and related documents had to be adjusted. Harry retained his status as a member of the royal family. This difference immediately created an uncomfortable rift between the couple. Charles understood the institutional reasons behind the decision, but he also understood the price. He didn't object to William, but his expression suggested he was thinking something else. If this order was carried out, Harry might see it as final proof that the family had chosen the throne over him. Anne continued to examine each page. She didn't smile. There was no sense of victory in the room. For Anne, this wasn't about defeating someone. It was simply about ensuring that Elizabeth's directive was executed within limits and according to procedure. Elsewhere, Meghan received her first warning. She read the document once, then she read it a second time. Her initial reaction was shock, but upon seeing the confirmation that William was the one authorized to activate it, the shock quickly turned into anger. For Meghan, the title wasn't just a designation. It was tied to the day she married Harry. It was tied to the charitable work she had done in the name of the royal family, associated with her years of service, public appearances, motherhood, and the relentless media pressure she endured. It was all part of her public journey. Therefore, when informed that the title was about to be restricted, Meghan felt not just that she had lost a title, she felt that a part of her identity was being redefined by others. Harry began calling the palace's contacts repeatedly. None of the calls connected. He requested to speak directly with Charles, then with Anne. Finally, he requested only one person, William. In Harry's mind, this was no longer a constitutional process. He believed his brother was punishing Meghan without giving him the right to protect his wife and family. When informed that the order would take effect before midnight, Harry decided to return to England. His request was clear: a private meeting, no assistants, no lawyers, no cameras. William agreed. And when Harry entered the room at Windsor between the two chairs, there was only one object on the table: Queen Elizabeth II's decree. The debate began with a title, but within minutes, it had turned into a confrontation about wounds the brothers had avoided for years. Harry entered his private room at Windsor without looking at anyone. No assistants, no lawyers, no cameras, no royal protocol. Only the two brothers sat opposite each other, with Queen Elizabeth II's decree placed in the center of the oak table between them. Harry broke the silence first. He looked directly at William and said there was still time. The clock hadn't struck midnight yet. The order could still be revoked. William didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the document before him and shook his head slightly. No. That brief answer almost froze the atmosphere in the room. Harry stood up abruptly. He no longer spoke of constitutional clauses or procedures. According to Harry, William was directly targeting Meghan. He argued that his brother had used Elizabeth's memories as a tool, to legitimize something he had long desired to do. Harry said William couldn't accept him and Meghan building an independent life outside the palace, and was now using his power as heir to resolve a personal conflict in the name of protecting the institution. William maintained a calm tone. He responded that he had never opposed Harry and Meghan choosing their own path. They had the right to leave the royal family, the right to live independently, the right to build a career, the right to express their opinions publicly. But according to William, that freedom did not mean continuing to wield the symbolic weight of the throne, while no longer accepting the obligations and limitations that gave rise to that weight. He looked directly at Harry. This wasn't a matter of obedience. This was a matter of accountability. If the public can no longer distinguish between personal activities and the voice of the royal family, then the very foundations of the institution will be called into question. Harry immediately took a prepared stack of documents from the briefcase beside him. He placed each letter on the table. These were copies showing that in the past, some palace officials had approved the limited use of the Sussex designation in certain private activities. Harry said that if these documents were published, the whole world would question why William had changed the way the rules were applied. One could argue that this was not a consistent principle, but rather a selective decision, or even an act of retaliation. William did not argue with the letters. He opened the file in front of him. Then he gently took out another document. It was Elizabeth's last letter. William placed it on the table and turned it toward Harry. In the document, Elizabeth confirmed that all previous flexibility and informal concessions had been revoked following the Balmoral Heritage meeting. She requested that all future assessments be based on the new document, not on the old agreements. Harry picked up the letter. He looked at the date, then added again. His expression changed. The date on the document was after his last private conversation with his grandmother, a moment Harry would always remember as a loving encounter. He had never known that after that conversation, Elizabeth would still sign an institutional decision that could directly affect Meghan. Harry gently set the letter down. After a long pause, he asked, "Charles, does he agree with this?" William didn't answer immediately. He remained silent. It wasn't avoidance. It was the silence of someone who understood that any answer would only hurt the person sitting before them further. But that very silence led Harry to understand it differently. In his eyes, William had taken control. He had decided Meghan's fate himself. He had put an end to any chance of reconciliation. Harry stood up. No more words. He walked toward the door, paused for a few seconds, then left the room without looking back. William remained seated. His gaze lingered on Elizabeth's instructions for a long time. There was no sense of victory, only the heaviness of a decision he knew would change his family forever. Just as the door closed, Princess Anne quietly walked to the wooden cabinet in the room. She took out a second sealed suitcase, different from the one that had just been opened. When the lock was opened, it contained more than just documents. There was a small recording device that Elizabeth had left behind many years ago. That recording had never been played to anyone, and Elizabeth's first words would reveal that she not only predicted the confrontation between William and Harry, but also left a direct warning for both William and Charles. After Harry left the room, Charles remained motionless. He took out his phone, opened the messaging app, and typed his son's name. The first line appeared. Then it was deleted. He tried again, still unable to send. Charles didn't know how he should speak to Harry, as a father wanting to keep his son, as a king obligated to respect the process that had just been activated, or as a man silently pleading with his youngest son not to disappear completely from his life. Princess Anne stood behind him in silence. She didn't urge him. Neither did she offer comfort. Anne simply placed the second suitcase on the table, unlocked it, and took out the small sealed recording device along with Elizabeth's documents. The room fell silent again as the familiar voice of the late Queen rang out. Elizabeth spoke very slowly. She emphasized that this clause was not created to take revenge on Meghan. It was not intended to erase her marriage to Harry, nor was it intended to negate the work she had done during her time serving the royal family. The purpose of the clause was singular: to prevent royal power from becoming a personal brand that could be commercialized but existed outside the responsibilities, limits, and oversight of the monarchy. Elizabeth said that a title only retains its meaning when it is accompanied by duty. If the title retains its influence, but the holder is no longer accountable to the institution that created that influence, the boundary between family and monarchy will ultimately disappear. Then her voice paused for a few seconds. The next message was directed at William. She instructed him to only act when continued inaction would cause more harm than the rift in the family that its implementation would cause. That statement made it clear to everyone in the room that Elizabeth had never believed this decision would be easy. She knew it would be painful. She simply believed that at a certain point inaction would be even more dangerous. When the recording ended, Charles bowed his head. He admitted he had believed time could heal all wounds. He had hoped silence would preserve a chance for reconciliation. Anne looked at him and replied that hesitation was also a decision. Sometimes it doesn't protect anyone. It only keeps people trapped in the same wound longer. At the far end of the room, the clock continued to tick closer to midnight. William stood by the window looking out at the dark Windsor courtyard. No one asked him to change his mind. But no one could pretend that this order didn't come with a heavy price. The clock struck 12. The formal clause took effect. Immediately, departments began implementing changes. Palace records were revised. The old ceremonial lists were replaced. Official correspondence ceased using the title Duchess of Sussex alongside Meghan's name. External organizations were notified to adjust how they introduced her. Projects using language suggesting royal patronage were required to completely change their wording. There was no triumphant sound. Only cold administrative operations appeared on screens, and lines of text gradually disappeared from records. Elsewhere, Meghan sat before the statement scheduled for release the following morning. She watched as advisors erased the phrase Duchess of Sussex from line by line. No one dared tell her it was merely a technical change, because everyone understood it represented a change in how the world would perceive her from that moment on. Meghan asked everyone to leave the room. She took a pen and personally crossed out the title on the first page. Then she said very softly that the royal family wasn't just changing records. They were changing how the world was allowed to call her by her name. Harry stood beside her, unsure how to lessen the feeling of loss. Finally, he offered to voluntarily relinquish his own title. He said that if Meghan could no longer use the title, he would also cease to use his. But Meghan immediately refused. She understood that a symbolic sacrifice couldn't undo what was lost. And if Harry acted in anger, it could turn their private pain into a far more dangerous public battle. Meghan looked around the room and asked all her advisors to leave. No one objected. One by one, they quietly gathered their documents, closed their computers, and left. When the door closed, only Meghan and Harry remained in the room. Harry switched off both his phones. He placed them face down on the table, then took Queen Elizabeth II's last letter from the file and placed it between them. For the first time since the decree came into effect, there were no phone rings, no legal advisors, and no prepared words. Harry began to recount the whole affair. He spoke of the Balmoral Heritage meeting, of the transcript that had caused Elizabeth to worry that the line between personal activity and royal power was blurring, of the document revoking the informal concessions previously approved by the palace, of the sealing clause given to Anne for safekeeping, of the new Sussex project scheduled to be announced the following morning, and finally regarding William's decision that all activation conditions had been met. Meghan listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, she looked down at the letter and said that the title had never made her feel like she was borrowing an identity that didn't belong to her. It was given to her on her wedding day. It appeared alongside her name when she participated in charity work. It accompanied her through her years of royal service, during her pregnancies as a mother, and even during the most intense periods of media scrutiny. For Meghan, the title didn't just come from the palace. It had become a part of the life she truly lived. She looked at Harry and asked why, at a time when she needed her husband to stand completely by her side, He seemed to be protecting his grandmother's memory. Harry replied that he was standing by his wife, but loyalty couldn't force him to deny a document already signed and endorsed by Elizabeth. The conversation fell silent. On the computer screen, an unsent statement remained. It was the forceful response Meghan and her advisors had prepared. Inside were excerpts from private palace correspondence. There were messages relating to William and Charles. There were records of internal conversations. And there were documents powerful enough to portray the decision at Windsor as a personally motivated act. With the push of a button, the crisis would enter a completely different phase. Meghan placed her hand on the keyboard. Harry didn't ask her to stop. He only said that if those documents were released, they might win an argument for a few days, but it would make the family wounds a permanent part of public life. Meghan stared at the screen for a long time. Then she deleted the statement. She decided not to challenge the authenticity of the clause, not to start a legal battle, not to release private records, not to turn her marriage into the final battleground between Harry and William. Then Meghan opened the personal signature section and manually removed the title Duchess of Sussex. She said that if the royal family had decided the title would no longer be used as a public identity, she would move forward under her own name. Harry picked up his phone and sent William a short message. They wouldn't object. By morning, the story was on every front page. One fictional newspaper called it the Queen's Final Clause. Outside Buckingham Palace, the crowd quickly split into two sides. One side argued that William had defended the boundaries of the monarchy. The other side said Meghan had been humiliated through a cold process in which she had no chance to defend herself. Both sides believed their supporter had suffered injustice. Meanwhile, William sat alone in front of the television screen. Commentators repeatedly asked the same question. Has duty saved the monarchy, or has it just destroyed a family? Catherine entered but said nothing. She simply stood beside William as the screen showed images of protesters outside the palace. Then William's phone rang. Harry's name appeared on the screen. It was the first call since the confrontation at Windsor. But Harry wasn't calling to reclaim his title. He was calling to ask if anything between the two brothers could survive this decision. William looked at the screen for a few seconds before picking up the phone. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. No one raised their voice. No one tried to persuade the other to change their mind. Harry didn't ask for Meghan's title to be restored. Nor did William ask Harry to publicly endorse the recently implemented directive. Instead, they both mentioned Queen Elizabeth II. William said she never wanted to break up the family. The final clause wasn't created to erase Meghan's marriage, deny her motherhood, or deny her achievements. According to him, the sole purpose of the clause was to separate personal identity from institutional power, so that no one could use royal influence without the accompanying responsibilities. Harry was silent for a moment before admitting something they had both avoided many times. He and Meghan chose to leave royal life, but retained an identity shaped by that very institution. However, Harry said he couldn't accept the decision being imposed so abruptly, leaving Meghan no opportunity to prepare or engage in dialogue before things changed. William sighed softly. He confessed that the moment he signed the order, he knew he might lose his brother forever. It wasn't a victory, but the price he had to pay for what he believed to be his duty. Harry replied that Meghan wouldn't object to the order. She wouldn't sue, nor would she release any private documents she still held. But her pain was real and wouldn't disappear with arguments about procedure or the Constitution. Shortly afterward, King Charles III sent the same message to both sons. The decree wouldn't be reversed. The boundaries of the institution remained. But the door to communication between family members outside of royal matters would never be completely closed. In the weeks that followed, Meghan continued to appear under her own name. She lost the recognition associated with her public title, but also began to forge a path no longer dependent on palace approval. Anne completed the task Elizabeth entrusted to her without celebration. Charles realized that sometimes delay can have consequences as severe as the action itself. William maintained the boundaries of the institution, but at the cost of a part of his relationship with his brother. Harry accepted the irreversible outcome while still protecting the pain of his beloved wife. Before ending the call, Harry whispered, "Grandmother was always our grandmother before she became the one who left the orders." William replied, "And perhaps she believed we would remember both." No one fully apologized. No one promised reconciliation. But no one hung up in anger either. In your opinion, was William right to carry out Elizabeth's orders, or should he have prioritized reconciliation with Harry over the boundaries of the monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories.